My name is Brandon Ketchum, and I am a senior nutrition student at Benedictine University Mesa. And for my nutrition capstone project, for my health education program, I'm going to be doing education on nutrition for baseball players for the off season and during the in season. So my objectives for this health education program, my first objective is by the end of this webinar, I'm hoping that the viewer will be able to name the 3 macronutrients that we are going to cover. My second objective is by the end of this webinar, the viewer will be able to identify the choice nutrient for recovery. So the nutrient that is going to help the body recover the best. And my third objective for this webinar is that the viewer will be able to identify the 5 sections of a food label that will be covered in the second presentation of this webinar. So the first section of this presentation, we will be talking about macronutrients and their purpose for the body. So the first macronutrient that we're going to be covering is carbohydrates. Carbohydrates should make up about 45 to 65% of your daily calorie intake, anywhere from that range from 45 to 65%. They act as the main producer of energy for the body, especially regarding high intensity exercise. So carbohydrates are going to be responsible for providing the body energy when you're doing really hard, really intense exercise. Carbohydrates are made up of small molecules called glucose, and glucose is a monosaccharide that combines with other monosaccharides to make different molecules. So glucose is going to be our small, basic form of carbohydrates, and that molecule of glucose is going to combine with other molecules of glucose to make bigger, more complex molecules. And when carbohydrates are consumed, they transform into glycogen, which is then stored in the muscles and liver for use. So carbohydrates are made of glucose, and when you ingest carbohydrates, they change into glucose, but glucose is then transformed into glycogen, which is stored in our muscles. So glycogen is the stored form of glucose. And there are 2 main categories of carbohydrates. There are complex carbohydrates and there are simple sugars. So to further break this down, first we have simple sugars. Simple sugars consist of monosaccharides and disaccharides. These are single glucose molecules or 2 that are bonded together. They are a very simple form of carbohydrates. And because of this, they are a simpler form. So because of that, they are very quick to digest and the energy is readily available to use. So that is a very quick, fast digesting form. So the energy is readily available. And you can see here at the bottom, furthest to the left, we have a monosaccharide, which is just 1 glucose molecule. You can see in its simplest form, we have glucose. And then our second picture directly in the middle, we have a disaccharide, which you can see is just 2 glucose molecules bonded together. They're bonded together using a glycosidic bond. But as you can see, disaccharide meaning 2, there are 2 glucose molecules bonded together. Then we have complex carbohydrates, and these consist of oligosaccharides and polysaccharides. Oligosaccharides are going to be anywhere from 3 to 10 glucose molecules bonded together. And then a polysaccharide is going to be anywhere from 10 above. So any more than 10 glucose molecules bonded together are going to be a polysaccharide. And these are long chains of glucose molecules. Therefore, they're more complex. These take longer for the body to break down. They're still going to provide energy, but it's just going to take longer for the body to break them down. And further on the right, you can see we have our chain of glucose molecules. There's only 5 here, so this would be an oligosaccharide. But as you can see, it's just a long chain of glucose molecules bonded together. For our second macronutrient, we have protein. And for protein, the daily calorie intake should be made up of about 10 to 35% of lean protein. Now, protein contains any number of the 21 amino acids. And amino acid chains are the building block of proteins. So proteins are made up of amino acids. They bond together to form chains, and then proteins are made up of these amino acid chains. Now, there are 9 essential amino acids. These amino acids are essential because we must obtain them through our diet. Our body cannot synthesize these, so they are essential for us to obtain them through our diet. There are also 12 non-essential amino acids. These amino acids are amino acids that our bodies produce, so they're not as important to intake through our diet. And a complete protein source is one that adequately supplies the 9 essential amino acids. And an incomplete protein source supplies low amounts of one or more of the essential amino acids. So some functions of protein include providing structure. They help with movement throughout the body through muscle contraction, through the use of tendons and ligaments. The structure they provide are to bone, skin, teeth, all use protein to help provide structure. They are involved in transport of cells, so through the cellular membrane of different substances. And they're also involved in cell communication between the intercellular area and the exterior cellular area. There is an easy rule to follow when it comes to how much protein to intake, and this rule says to consume 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight. That is a general rule when it comes to how much protein you should intake. And protein that is found in supplements and shakes, it's a good additive, but it cannot replace the high quality protein that is found in whole foods. So when we intake our protein, we want to try as hard as we can to get our protein from whole foods, from natural foods, and supplements are a great additive, but we don't want that to be our main source of protein. Some examples of high quality lean proteins include chicken, turkey, so poultry meats, lean beef, eggs, specifically egg whites, Greek yogurts, nuts and legumes, and fish. Other meats such as beef and pork, those are high in protein, but they also contain a considerable amount of fat. And so when we're talking about good, healthy protein sources, we typically want to stick towards lean sources of protein, which in most meats are going to be poultry and fish. So now moving on to the third macronutrient, we have fats. The dietary recommendation for fats is a range of 20 to 35% of your daily calorie intake should be made of fats. Now, any nutrient can become unhealthy or bad for you when it's consumed in excess or abused. And fats are no exception to that, but fats are very good for you when people are trying to put on lean body mass. They typically see fats as something they should stay away from because they think it's going to add fat mass and bad mass, but fats are a necessary nutrient that you need to ingest. Any macronutrient is bad if you consume it in excess, but if you consume the right amount of fats, they are very beneficial for you. Fats are made of lipids, and a lipid is a long chain of carbon atoms with hydrogen atoms attached. So you can see at the bottom image, you can see the long chain of carbon atoms with hydrogen atoms surrounding the chain, and the central part of the molecule with all the carbon chains, that's also referred to as a carbon backbone. So that would be the backbone of the molecule. The functions of fat are to provide energy to the body, and they're also stored in adipose tissue to provide protection to organs, all the vital organs, and regulate body temperature. So fats are just as important in providing the body energy as are carbohydrates. And in fact, fats give you about 9 kilocalories of energy per gram compared to carbs, which yield only 4 kilocalories per gram. So they're very, very important in energy production. Now, there are two types of fats. There's unsaturated fats and there's saturated fats. First, looking at unsaturated fats, an unsaturated fatty acid is a lipid that contains one or more double bonds in its carbon chain. So a unsaturated fatty acid that contains one double bond in its chain is called a monounsaturated fatty acid, and one that contains two or more double bonds is called a polyunsaturated fatty acid. Now, these double bonds in the chain, this creates a bend in the structure, which allows them to be less densely packed together. And this is why the main difference between unsaturated and saturated fatty acids, unsaturated fatty acids will be liquid at room temperature. So they're considered oils. An example of an unsaturated fatty acid would be olive oil. And you can see at the image below, this is how the double bonds create a bend in the structure. You can see there are two double bonds in this carbon backbone, which makes this a polyunsaturated fatty acid. And for a monounsaturated fatty acid, this image would look the exact same, except there would only be one double bond here. So one of these carbon bonds would only be a single bond. Now, saturated fatty acid is a lipid made up of carbon atoms that form a chain with no double bonds attached. This creates a straight chain that allows them to be tightly packed to one another. And this is why saturated fatty acids are solid at room temperature. So they are classified as fats. And an example would be coconut oil or butter, or another example would be if you have a nice steak, all that white marbling on the steak is fat. It's solidified animal fat. And if you look at the image, you see how every carbon chain has one single bond. So it creates a tight, straight structure in the molecule. And so that allows other saturated fatty acids to be closely and densely packed right next to it. Now, this is not a macronutrient, but it's something that I wanted to briefly touch on is hydration and electrolytes. Now, proper hydration is key to optimal health and physical performance. Hydration helps our bodies regulate internal temperature and aids in blood flow. So if you're dehydrated, your blood does not have as much water in it, which can cause your body to flow blood more difficultly, and that can cause less oxygen to get to your muscles, less oxygen to get to your lungs, and so that causes restriction in the airflow throughout your body. Now, during exercise, our bodies begin to sweat, which is a natural function that disperses heat generated by muscle contraction to keep the body's temperature close to homeostasis. Now, sweat contains water as well as variable amounts of sodium and smaller amounts of potassium, calcium, and magnesium. That's why it's important to consume electrolytes during exercise to replenish these minerals into our bodies that are pouring out through our sweat. So our bodies need to replenish these either before or usually during exercise or any sort of event, sporting event. Now, the second part of this presentation, we're talking about diet variation between off-season and in-season for baseball athletes. So the first section we'll talk about is off-season nutrition. And the first thing we have to take into account when talking about off-season nutrition is taking in mind that what the goals are for the athlete. Now, for baseball, the off-season is to train and increase in areas such as speed, strength, power, force production. So all of these areas are what we want to increase in the off season. And so what most baseball players are trying to do is to put on body mass is where a lot of this is going to come from. And nutrition is a large part in helping the athlete reach these physical goals they want to achieve. Therefore, they need to fuel their bodies properly. So in order for an athlete to gain strength and body mass, they're going to need a very large caloric intake. However, in the off season, athletes are going through longer, more strenuous workouts, meaning they're burning a lot more calories. Athletes are sometimes going through 2 workouts a day. They're probably going to the gym for 2 hours at one part of the day, and then going through a 3-hour practice in the afternoon. So they're burning a lot of energy, a lot of calories, meaning they need a lot of calories in order for their bodies to build themselves up. And so in the off season, it's good to consume around 4 to 5 meals per day. This is to make sure that your body is getting enough calories to intake so that it can actually synthesize the things it needs to grow. And so these meals, you have your 3 meals a day, but then it's also good to have a meal or a pre-workout snack before working out and before practice and after working out to help your body recover and get ready for the next exercise session. An athlete's nutrition for the off season should be balanced, making sure they're getting a serving of the 3 main macronutrients that we talked about at all 3 main meals. So you want to be sure that you're replenishing those carbohydrates, those fats for those energy stores. And then you also want to make sure you're replenishing the protein so that your body can use those amino acids for protein synthesis to help build the muscles up. It's important for the athletes, especially, to focus on protein. This is because in order for the muscles to grow, we want to make sure the body is supplied with enough amino acids for protein synthesis. So like I said before, protein is the main macronutrient for recovery because we want to replenish those amino acids so that our body can use them for protein synthesis to build the body up. And when we're going through these long exercise sessions, burning these calories, burning these proteins, and we don't replenish them, then our body has nothing to use to synthesize proteins. And so we need to replenish them. We need to give our bodies fuel to use. Using snacks is an effective way to close gaps on macronutrients. And so you take pre-workout snacks, you take post-workout snacks are very effective in increasing caloric intake, increasing that protein intake so that your body has enough nutrients to use. Tracking macronutrients is an effective way to ensure that you're fueling your body enough to facilitate growth. There's a site called MyFitnessPal where you can look up virtually any food or recipe and find out how much carbohydrates, fats, protein are in that food. This is not 100% accurate because there are some brands and foods that aren't in there and some you have to search. And you might not always find what you want, but it is helpful to find out and get a guesstimate range of how much you're intaking. Now, moving to in-season nutrition, we're now looking at how you can change up your diet to help your body be ready to perform in season. When you're fueling your body for mid-season performance, we'll talk about how to change up your diet to better fit your needs for in-season because they're going to look very different from off-season. It's helping to adjust what you're consuming as well as when you're eating it. So the main difference between in-season from off-season is that our workload drops significantly because now we're playing games and some days you have travel days. So the workload is going to drop significantly. instead of strenuous workouts, you're now playing games. You're not always going to participate. You're taking travel days. Sometimes you're maybe not playing that day. Oftentimes you get 5-10 minute breaks between physical exertion. So between innings, when you're warming up, when you're in the dugout because your team's hitting, sometimes you're sitting there for 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes. It could be a long inning. So sometimes you're sitting there doing nothing and your body's not really burning any calories. Unlike if you were in the gym for 2 hours where your body is burning an extreme amount of calories using an extreme amount of physical exertion. That's not really happening all the time in season. So this means that the athlete does not need such a large caloric intake. Instead, they want to prepare their bodies for physical performance, because if you continue that large caloric intake, you're not using the same physical exertion you are in the off season. You're going to put on mass amounts of fat mass, excess fat mass, and that's just going to slow your body down. So to do this, to prepare your body for better performance, we're lowering the caloric intake, and also we're going to want to consume quick digesting carbs or the simple sugars for quick energy and to hydrate our body with water and electrolytes. These are going to want to be consumed before or during the game. This is what it's going to get your body ready for the game. It's going to give you that quick, ready to use energy for the game, and also keeping you hydrated, keeping your body replenished during the game. So some key points between off season, or some key points for in season, is before competition, we want an adequate calorie intake because we want some energy to use during the game. We want our bodies ready. So it's going to be those quick digesting simple sugars for the glucose storage to have our body ready. The purpose is to fuel our body and to be ready to perform. And then after a game, we also want an adequate calorie intake. This is going to be a high protein intake for muscle recovery, because protein is the main macronutrient for recovery. And so we're going to want that to help our muscles recover. We're also going to want to consume fluids to help fight dehydration and replenish those electrolytes lost in sweat. And the purpose of this is to heal the body and just prepare it for the next competition. Now, going back to mentioning the pre and post workout snacks, we're going to provide some examples to help facilitate that. And for pre-workout snacks, the best thing you can do is to get whole foods, because some processed foods have a lot of refined sugar and they're just not all that good for you. And so whole foods are going to be the best option. And whole foods that provide simple sugar, that's for that quick energy, ready to use, will not cause a crash or make you not feel good like processed sugar. These foods that include that will be different kinds of fruits, such as bananas, strawberries, blueberries, grapes are great for quick burning energy, lots of natural sugars in there. Or if you're going to plan this out, those simple sugars can be eaten right before an event or a workout for that quick energy. But if you're planning out your workout or you're planning out a meal before a game, a couple hours before, then you can eat more of a balanced meal with that lean protein with complex carbohydrates. Because again, those complex carbohydrates, they're the longer chains, and so they're going to be take longer to digest. And the fats are going to take longer to digest, but they're also going to fuel those energy stores, and that'll provide energy throughout the day for you to use for your workout or competition. Examples of these would include eggs, specifically egg whites, walnuts, almonds, sweet potatoes, and rice are all great sources of complex carbohydrates and proteins and fats. Now, for post-workout, after a workout, many athletes will be dehydrated, and some of these sport drinks supply great levels of electrolytes and water for hydration, but they also can have a lot of extra sugar in them. And so one thing you can do to take more of a whole food route, you can restore your hydration and electrolytes by drinking water with a little salt added to it. And the added sodium helps the body retain water in the cells. And also, lean protein is what our muscles use to repair tissue damage sustained during exercise and are the main contributor to muscle growth. So, for easily digestible protein, many sources recommend to use a protein shake directly after a workout. And now, better protein sources will be ones that are free of additives and sugars, but also as we said, whole foods are often better than supplements and additives. And so an example of a easy protein shake you can make using whole foods would be 2 cups of 2% milk, 1 tablespoon of peanut butter, 1 medium-sized banana, and 1 tablespoon of cocoa powder. This will provide you about 24 grams of protein. Now, you would just blend this all up in a smoothie, and a position paper recommends that we intake 20 to 30 grams of protein after a workout for adequate recovery and protein synthesis. Now, this shake is well within the requirements, supplying 24 grams of protein. That's right around about the protein servings most protein shakes supplements will provide. So this is a great whole food alternative, and it tastes very good. So that is the end of the presentation on macronutrients and off-season versus in-season nutrition. The second presentation will be regarding how to read a nutrition label, and there will be a survey following the second presentation. Thank you very much.